Hey everybody, my name is Chase Pipes and you're watching Chasing History, brought to you by Arrowheads.com and Smoky Mountain Relic Room. And we're here today with the legendary Art Gerber. Art, I can't thank you enough for letting us sit down.
I just can't tell you. Remember, you were just a baby that big when I first knew you.
I know it. Art has been a lifelong friend and a lifelong collector of artifacts, antiquities, militaria, you name it, Art's collected it. And we wanted to sit down and do our very first sit-down interview with Art and just talk about his life, about collecting throughout, the past 60, 70 years of collecting that you've done, and really get into the heart of one of Art's major loves, and that's the Ohio River Valley area in southern Indiana and its history both in prehistory and in historic times. So, Art, tell us a little bit about yourself. When were you born?
I was born January the 8th, 1938, 8 o'clock in the morning, and I weighed 8 pounds.
So, you were in Tell City. Is that the city that you were born in, or was it Corn?
I was actually born in Evansville, Indiana.
Evansville?
And I lived there 2 years. My father ran a movie theater in Evansville called the Mary Lane. And my parents, after about 2 years, were getting a divorce. And my grandmother came down and she said, I won't leave this home unless I have young Arthur with me. So she took young Arthur and I went to Cannelton. And that's where I was raised.
And Cannelton, that's an Ohio riverboat town. Community.
Yes. It was farmed about 1837.
Okay.
And it's farmed for the Cannel Coal Company. Underneath the whole town, there's a Cannel coal mine.
Now that's something interesting because Cannel coal was something that was traded, used, and worked by prehistoric Native American cultures. Oh. Can you tell us a little bit about Cannel coal, its use, its trade?
Well, Cannel coal is a very low sulfur, but we don't care about that so much then. But it was very hard. And it was something like steatite. And it made beautiful artifacts.
Steatite, like the stone material?
Yes. And the only thing that they did wrong about Cannel coal a lot of times, they'd make a pipe out of it. And I always thought, why would a person take a piece of coal and make a pipe? But, that was neither here nor there. And then they would make celts out of it. And, of course, it didn't have the rigidity of granite or something like that. Right.
So you grew up in Cannelton.
Yes.
Mining Cannel coal. When you were a kid, when were you first aware of, history, of artifacts, of collecting, the whole idea that you could actually walk out into a farmer's field and pick up something that nobody has seen for 1,000 years? What age were you first aware of it?
I think that around the 5th or 6th grade in high school. And the reason that I got interested, I read that there were hundreds of treaties made with the Indians, and we didn't keep a blessed one. And I thought, wow, this is really something. And then what got me disturbed, I'd go to the movies, and I liked the movies because the movie theater is right next to where I lived, the Urban Theater. But at the same token, the cowboys always won. And I thought, these Indians got to be better fighters than that, and I got started interested and thought they were being portrayed wrong in the movie world. So
that's really cool, because from the get-go, you saw and had this idea and this feeling that there's no way that the Indians portrayed in the movies in the 40s and the 50s was accurate at all.
No, not at all.
So that kind of stirred your curiosity.
Right. And then I knew that these people had to come from somewhere, and it looked like the somewhere was right here.
So the natives that you saw being portrayed in the movies, and then the artifacts that you were finding when you were first starting out, what kind of ideas did that run through your head? How did the evolution of that thought of, the natives were portrayed wrongly in the movies and the theaters, how did that idea emerge, develop, and grow as you grew?
Well, I thought that if I could be of any use in life, it ought to be try to portray the Native Americans the way they actually were. A race of people, very smart, intelligent, inventive race of people that had to exist with nothing like our modern steel or anything. They had flint, they had stone, they had wood, and you know they had to get through life like that.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's fascinating to me that, you know, a lot of people, they don't really understand or appreciate just the technology and how well native cultures survived, you know, with nothing but what they could create on the land.
That's
and,
right.
And it seems like one of the most important areas that took place was here in southern Indiana.
Well, it's true. I wrote a book called The Art Gerber Story. I've been very successful with it. It came out in 2007. But I wrote that book because when I thought about the Indian cultures that were here, I looked out at the Ohio River, one of the major rivers of the United States, and I thought to myself, that's Interstate 64, Interstate 65, Interstate 75. This is the way the Indians would get around.
Mm-hmm.
And they could put say you took a travois and attached it to your back and you drug it over hill and dale through the woods, you could possibly control 125, 150 pounds. But in a dugout canoe, one man could have maybe 1,000 pounds. Mm-hmm. So it was, you know, it was in the economy. That's why the tribes settled. And then here in this particular area, there are a lot of overhangs. Mm-hmm. Because in winter, you're out there and there's no heat unless you make it.
Right.
And an overhang is a wonderful thing to keep from
the wind and
everything.
Now, when you were a kid, were there other kids that were your age that you ran around with that had this same interest and idea?
No, not really.
Were you kind of alone?
I was more or less a loner in this world, but my father married Buddy Scheidegger, a very important collector in this area, older than me, and he took me under his wing, and her name was Gert, and she got killed in an automobile accident, and then my father married my mother. So Buddy Scheidegger and I sort of had a connection, and in fact I would spend more time at his house in the evening studying Indians with him and what he found that day and all this than I did at home.
Okay. Now you were mentioning about rock shelters and stuff like that earlier. The WPA and the CCC boys, the Works Progress Administration, out of the 30s and 40s, you know, they did a lot of alterations to the landscape. You know, the Great Flood of '37, preventative things to you know, help in flood control. What's some of the stories that happened around here? You know, during the time?
Very interestingly, there was a major older collector. He's deceased now, but real good friend of mine, and his name was Irvin Darty. Mm-hmm. And Irvin Darty was in charge of building the flood wall in Tell City, Indiana, and in Cannelton, Indiana. And so he was in charge of all these government workers. And so they worked 5 days a week. On weekends, he devised the notion that they shouldn't be around idle. We'll sort of help. So he bought them cases of beer, and they went out to every overhang that's in this county and dug it.
So here's a government-sponsored project, foreman of the sponsored project, you know, out, you know, building levees and dams and walls for erosion. He's got these guys there, picks them up, gets them a case of beer, and goes, let's go excavate rock shelters.
They were government employees during the week, and they were civilians on the weekend.
So, you know, in that area, and see, you know, the Works Progress Administration, for those of you who don't know, was one of FDR's main ways of getting the country back mobile again during the Great Depression. You know, you would work, you would have camps. It was set up kind of a military style where you would work and you would have camps. You would have $5, you would pay $25 a month. $5 of that would be yours to spend, and $20 of that was either sent home to your family or were put into a bank account when you ended your term of service. But you lived there and you camped there on site where that project was going. And a lot of archaeological excavations in the 30s that were done, almost 90% of them were excavated using WPA and CCC workers, and this is one of those examples of that. You know, you've got a foreman who's interested in collecting history, and it's not his task or his job, you know, to do that, but he's got an interest in it. So he grabs the guys a case of beer, hot dogs, and says, "Let's go do some excavation." That's pretty cool, man.
Yes, it is.
That's pretty cool. Now, Art, the most culturally and technologically advanced native society north of Mexico was located in the Ohio River Valley.
Yes.
Specifically, southern Ohio, southern Indiana, southern Illinois, northern part of Kentucky.
Right.
Why was that? Why was, you know, you've got the entire width and breadth of the United States, yet in this one belted region, you know, you have the most technologically, culturally, religiously advanced prehistoric native groups living, thriving, and operating, not just for one period, but for a huge span of time. You know, why is that? Why here?
Well, I think that you're centrally located in the United States. You're on some major waterways. The Ohio River goes down, hits the Wabash River, which goes the entire breadth of Indiana, all the way to the top. And so you have all these trade routes that could go into the Carolinas, that could go into Kentucky, Tennessee, Michigan.
Now, when we say trade routes, we're talking rivers.
I would say rivers, mainly.
Because, see, it's like you were saying earlier, you know, when you looked at the Ohio River, you saw Highway 64 or Interstate 64.
Interstate 64.
When you were, you know, and that's one of the things that we've got to think about is that, you know, river traffic and commerce has literally been going on the rivers for over 7,000 years and is still today in the 21st century is being continued on. And so what you're saying is that you've got basically the drainage of the entire central part of the breadbasket of America dumping into one river.
That's true. And, you know, the Ohio River goes all the way up Pennsylvania, all the way up.
Right.
And so it's a vast, vast trade route. And the Hopewellian people were tremendous traders. And they coveted the best of everything. You know, if there's a prettier rock over in Ohio, go get that rock.
Yeah.
If there's a prettier rock in Kentucky, got to have that.
Now, what would the Hopewell trade to these other groups?
Well, one of the things which I've been associated with, there was a cache of blades at the famous Crib Mound site, which is only 15 miles from where we're sitting right now. I was lucky to be there. They harvested tons of Harrison County flint, such as this, from up in Harrison County, Indiana.
And this is one of the Crib Mound blades?
Crib Mound Catch blades, of which we found over 10,000 of these. And what you're seeing on here, and I'll explain this a little bit, you see this heavy calcification? This is the side that laid down. And the pit went 16 feet across and 4 feet high. I don't know how far back, but as water dripped down through there, it would deposit the calcium out of the water. And like in a cave, a stalactite or a stalagmite takes 100 years to form 1 inch of stalactite or stalagmite. So the calcification of these is very distinctive. And we have theorized, this is with Dr. Gramley and myself, that these were something that they would use for trade and bartering. In other words, they chipped these out about 100 river miles away from here. Not very far actual miles, but river miles. And chipped them out. And this blade now could be a finished product. It could be a spade. It could be a scraper. But mainly, they would trade this, and if they needed a arrowhead or a spear that day to go hunting with, they would finish it up and ship it.
Because, see, the most difficult task is taking a nodule of rock and getting that nodule of rock down into a workable shape where you can create anything, any tool out of it. And that's the most labor-intensive part of it is taking that nodular rock and working it down into a preform like this. Most of the work's already done, and so you have very little time to make your arrowhead or your spade or your flint. So,
Well, in this way, if you wanted a knife, this is a knife. If you wanted 2 arrowheads, it's 2 arrowheads. This could be conceivably anything that you could nap out.
and so they use it as a form of currency.
Right, currency. In other words, the people coming down the river may have had lots and lots of beaver hides. These people, they knew winter's coming on, they're going to get cold, so they need these beavers. And they would say, now listen, we'll give you some flint, we need your beavers. Or say they went and got some of the minerals that come from North Carolina, which is so mineral rich. Say they wanted something exotic, mica, to make a mirror, or a decoration for their outfit, so they went out in the sun, they would glitter. The Hopewell people were an extremely intelligent, slave-oriented. They captured people and made them slaves. And according to Dr. Gramley, he told me that their knowledge of plants was so extensive that they developed a strain of tobacco called nicotania. Extremely high nicotine content. And he told me that if you smoke that, I've never smoked, but if you smoke that, you'll get high. So in his mind, the Hopewell, because they always settled on the river, they could block that river, not let anybody back. They were the first drug lords.
That actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because, that type of tobacco would have been heavily sought over in a lot of places.
Wow.
But here's what else is interesting. Speaking of the cash blades, is they had a source of this material that they could nap into this finished product, therefore saving time. And so it was kind of like they were using time as a currency. Because here's something, it's a time-saving implement. Just like we today use all kinds of things in our culture and technology to save time, this is something, thousands of years ago that they were using and making and trading for other goods to save time.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And really honestly, when you think about it, the most valuable commodity on the planet is time.
That's true.
And it's just fascinating to see it in a blade thousands of years ago than as today. So what about their technology? So we've got the Hopewell all trading throughout cultures from as far north as Minnesota, as far south as the Gulf of Mexico, as far east as North Carolina, as far west as the plains. We've got this extensive trade network going on. What kind are they trading ideas as well? Are they trading what kind of technologies are they trading?
Well, they believed, like the Egyptians, that you have a lot of embellishment, a lot of fine jewelry, let's call it, and so they coveted this, and their leaders dictated, how they would do it, and they would probably, enslave people. They would farm. Anytime, Chase, that you get a group of people that don't have to go out every day into the forest and hunt. In other words, their whole life is just hunting to keep alive. The Hopewell knew how to grow things. They're an agrarian society. When you get people that can settle down, and now we have collective thought, like say Cahokia over by St. Louis. You have collective thought. From collective thought comes great ideas.
The sharing ideas, the sharing of knowledge.
Right.
Because the way I've always learned it is that the more or the less time that you have devoted to your food, your fodder, your water, all this other thing, the more time is allotted for you to be able to be creative, to think about other things, to create, what have you, to advance technology. It's the human species' ability to control his need, his basic bodily function needs, food and water and shelter. Right. Once those are accomplished, there's almost nothing that
anything
can be done.
Can be done, right?
Now, one of the great technologies that came out of this part of the world was the atlatl.
Yes.
And
we happen to have a great atlatl here today.
Now, explain what an atlatl is.
Well, an atlatl is, in its simplest form, we have here a deer antler handle. We have here a shaft of wood. We have in the middle what we consider a bannerstone or a counterbalance weight. And then the end, which is the real function of this whole thing, is the atlatl hook, which is a deer antler. Mm-hmm. And they would put an arrow up here, notch it. They'd hold it back here in their fingers, and then they would throw it. Now, what does that do? We have now, with our instruments and everything, put sensors into a cow or pig carcass. Person took a spear and threw it. It has so much force vector. Mm-hmm. Now, we take an arrow and put it with this atlatl, and we hurl it into the same carcass. We have 200 times more force. Much better killing instrument.
Well, it's a marker of technology.
Right.
You know, this is like going from a flintlock to a percussion cap.
Right.
As far as technology. Just like in all things, what marks different periods of history is advancements in technology. Now, in Europe, the atlatl has been found to go back at least 40,000 years in Europe, we know. In the Americas, there's a lot of debates on when the first people populated North America. But in the Americas, we know that the Paleo-Indians had the atlatl technology. But the one thing that they didn't have with their atlatls is this piece right here. And this is the bannerstone. Just like we get advancements in technology from 8 tracks to tapes, from tapes to CDs, from CDs to MP3 downloads and digital downloads, the atlatl is a marker of technology. In the Paleo period, 13,500 years ago, the atlatl was just this stick without the central piece. In the Archaic period, is you get an advancement in technology. We're going from, CDs to MP3 down, or we're going from tapes to CDs with the advancement of adding this, the counterbalance. And like Art was saying, it adds pounds per thrust, because that's what you're doing is your arm can only leverage so much weight, but when you have the atlatl, you're adding 2 feet onto your arm and you're adding leverage. With the addition of this piece, the bannerstone, you're adding pounds per thrust to that leverage. And the native peoples didn't have the bow and arrow until about 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. Before that, this is the technology that they had. And the greatest advancement out of that period was this piece right here. Now, Art, tell us about the bannerstone. And the bannerstone is something that you are most famous for.
Well, I've always liked bannerstone. The very earliest bannerstones were fairly primitive. This is a reproduction, but it's a rather nice reproduction. And this is a more advanced bannerstone. Some of them became extremely elaborate. I don't know if we brought a... Oh, we did. These are exceptional bannerstones. This banner right here is perhaps one of the finest banners ever found in America. This particular piece, as I've said, and it's not because I have it, but in actuality it is one of the top bannerstones ever found in America. The fact is, you can see the sheen, you can see the beauty of the stone. The Indian, when they were making it, were looking at the raw rock and they said, wow, look at this. And I want to show you this. This is so translucent that when they took the piece and wanted to impress their neighbors, they would take it and show it to the sun. But look at this. That is candy stripe. Candy stripe. And the interesting thing about this particular rock is it's ferruginous quartz. And what that means is to drill this hole This piece is probably 4 inches, a little bit more than 4 inches long. It took 300 hours per inch to drill this, just to make the drilling. They would use sand, water, and a cane, and they would spin it. It would take months, maybe a year, to make this particular piece because you're only drilling the hole. Now we have to polish down the whole piece, and just look at this sheen. It's just a candy stripe banner.
When Art says exceptional, he's been extremely modest. We are fortunate and blessed enough to have some of the most fantastic banner stones discovered in North America with us right now. And thank you for sharing it with us.
Well, thank you. And this banner was found at up in Harrison County, and the rest of all these banners were from the Crib Mound, which is very close to here, like I said, about 15 miles away. In fact, this particular banner has an interesting psychological story with it. I was sitting on the beach, had got there about 3 o'clock in the morning, and at 6 I'm already pooped out, and it's come daylight. But a friend came. He was a deputy sheriff from northern Indiana. And he came down and he said, "Arthur, where can a guy find some rocks?" Well, we had found these blades, and so we thought for friends we would bury a few around the property and know where they were. And if somebody would come and ask where some arrowheads were, we'd say, "Well, we've been thinking about something up by a tree." So I got, Maury was his name, I got him up by the tree and he found 10 or 12 cash blades. Thrilled to death. So he comes back down to the beach where I'm at, and I'm still sitting there sifting sand in my hands, thinking if I ought to go to sleep or not. And he said, "Where can I find something good?" I said, "That's easy. Listen to me." I said, "Now this is the deputy sheriff." I said, "Go 10 steps that way. Now turn right, go 4 steps, go 5. I'm making this up, I don't remember exactly. But it was a real complicated treasure map. And this is pure sand. It's a sandy beach. He had a little tiny shovel with him. And I said, "You're it. That's it." And he said, "Well, what do I do now?" I said, "You stick your little shovel in the ground." So he stuck his shovel in, and as soon as that shovel came out, here the sand's pouring off of this bannerstone right here.
Just straight out of coincidence.
And I'm looking at him and I said, "Oh my God, we have found a banner." And he said, "No, I found a banner." So after 40 different ways of threatening and cajoling him that I should have this, 10 years later I finally got it.
Oh, that's awesome. And you divined him to it like a
Divined him to it, yes.
Now, what different types of banner stones do we have here?
Well, this is an hourglass bannerstone. Very pleasing shape. This is another hourglass. This is an hourglass. And this is a butterfly banner that I found at the crib. And these are more or less just simpler banners.
Now, why would they have these different types of banner stones? Do we know? Was it just for aesthetics?
We don't know. I think it's aesthetics. It's the same way when two people would paint a picture, whether Michelangelo does it or Leonardo da Vinci, they're going to paint it a little different.
Yeah.
It's according to what they're thinking.
That's a good way to put it. Never
Yeah.
thought of it like that.
Yeah. So far we've talked about pieces that have been in isolation. In other words, it's one single piece. Now, this didn't occur this way. Say we're talking about modern man. He would put a bunch of things together maybe to preserve it for later on, for use or whatever. And the Native Americans did the same thing. And at the Crib Mound, this assemblage right here, which is really phenomenal, and this tremendous axe were all found together. And
That's fantastic.
it is really fantastic. Here's a piece of copper. This copper came from up in Wisconsin. Came a long way. We have these small shell beads. We have the much bigger shell beads, which were drilled out of a conch shell, double drilled. Then we have these snails. They rubbed them off, and they were drill. And then this is a drill, a Hopewell point, and a small knife or scraper. You have three different kinds of beads here. You have the snail shells where they were rubbed off right through here, made a bead. Then you have your beads out of the mussel shells. Then you have beads out of the Gulf of Mexico. Then you have a bead from Michigan or Wisconsin. So it's pretty neat that their travels went so far.
Well, and what's neat about this group is it shows you the complexity and a snapshot of the entirety of their trade networks. You've got copper from Wisconsin, Michigan, way up north, and then you have shells from the Gulf of Mexico, and local shells here. It just shows you how far and wide that they would go, that they would travel for aesthetically pleasing things.
Right. Well, they had a great sense of design, artisticness, and we try to think of them as savages and all this crap that the early movies depicted them as.
Right.
They weren't. They're like us. They had very brilliant people. They had the Werner von Brahms, probably.
Right.
They had the mathematicians. They had the stargazers. The shamans, the people that could heal.
Well, and that was because they were able to satisfy, their basic needs: shelter, food, water. All that through agriculture was taken care of.
And their musicality, their flute, their drumming.
And that's another.
They're the same as us.
Right.
Just a different time period.
Just a different time period with different tools.
Different tools.
The mindset, the mind was just as sharp then as it is today. That's one of the things I've always found interesting about the human species is that every generation thinks that they're far more intelligent than the previous one beforehand. And truth be told, they're not. They're just able to do different things because they have different tools. So, what's really fascinating to me about this group is that in one snapshot, it shows you the extensiveness of their trade, their technology, and their cultural identity. Because, here, we have copper from as far away as Michigan and Wisconsin, as far north. We have shell, which comes from as far south as the Gulf of Mexico. All of this, keep in mind, being traded by foot or canoe over 2,000 years ago. And it just shows you this is the type of body ornament, decoration that they would have had, and their desire for exotic goods. Just like we have that same desire for exotic goods today, 2,000 years ago they had that desire for exotic goods. And like with all cultures, you get technology changes. You get advancements in different and new point types. And like the axe back here that was found together with this group, this is a marker of technology. Now, when were the very first axes ever made?
I'm sure there were hand choppers from Europe, but the very first axes that we know of were in the Archaic period, and it's a full groove axe.
Completely grooved all the way around.
This is a 3/4 groove, which is a later axe. But the interesting thing is that we don't look at things like we're talking about people. We're not talking about what is an Indian. It's a person just like us. They have feelings. Now, to show the depth of the feelings, we can exemplify it with this one grouping of relics. A dog was with this, the family pet. They thought enough of this dog that they gave him all this elaborate stuff. I wanted him to be happy in his life thereafter.
Now, what other type of axes did they create? Did they make during this period? We've got the 3/4 groove. What type of axes do we have here?
Well, this is a fine example of an Indiana axe, very heavy, with its fluted top, so you could put a piece of wood in to tighten it down real tight. But they would chop down trees with this little rascal, and this was found near the town of Olytic, Indiana, which is very near Bedford, Indiana, and it was in the Bob Edler collection. Very, very capable old-time collector.
Now, what about axes like trophy axes?
Now, trophy axes are normally found in Ohio. But this particular trophy axe was found very near Nano Point, which is near Derby, Indiana. And the neat thing was that a farmer brought it in to me. He said, I would never let you have this. But right along here, you can't even see it, this piece of the blade was missing. So he said, I'm going to sell that to you. So I said, well, thank you. I mean, it's one of the top 5 trophy axes, I don't care if you're in Ohio or where it is, ever found. It's that good. So 10 years later, the man came in and he said, you deserve it, but he said, I can't hardly do it. He found the other piece.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah. And so the axe right now is virtually, you cannot tell.
Yeah.
There's a little slight line right here.
I think it was a plow damage that destroyed it.
It's hard to say. It's hard to say. It doesn't. There's only one plow mark here.
Yeah.
Little plow mark right there.
Because see, that's one of the things that damaged a lot of the artifacts and antiquities in North America. Are plows going through the arable soil. The 2 feet down is where a lot of artifacts were, and a lot of artifacts were destroyed in the 1800s, in the 1900s, and even still today through the process of modern agriculture.
Right.
Now, they made the axes during the Archaic period, and we have this piece here called a celt. Now,
yes.
The celt is
later.
Much later.
Much later.
And this is the height of wood cutting, let's say, technology of prehistoric.
See what you can do. To make this axe is extremely complicated. It took a long time. To make this celt, it's much simpler, and it functions the same. You can even see where this celt was hafted. Right through here, they put 2 pieces of wood, split it, tied it off with leather, and there you have your tree chopper or your head chopper or whatever kind of chopper you want to chop.
So just a quicker, easier way to make a tool.
It was.
For the same purpose.
Right. Just as we advance.
Just as we advance, technology advances through it.
This right now, Chris, is a 3/4 groove axe, and the flute is on the top because when they hafted this, it looks like a 2-man axe even, they'd put a piece of wood, split it, they would tie it with leather right here, and then they would drive a wedgie wood in right here to strengthen that. But just look at the sharpness of this bit after literally hundreds and hundreds of years. It's just amazing to me. And then this axe from the Crib, which is perhaps either the first or the second best axe ever found at the Crib. Look at this bit. It's just phenomenal. And they had to polish all this down. And it's just like a car. If you had a car with a rough finish, it's not like a car with a slick finish. This was a slick finish car. And then the trophy axe speaks for itself because, Chris, look at the stone. They traded far and wide and dear for this piece of rock. And then they put their best person on crafting this because they didn't want to waste their rock.
Now that's glacial granite, correct?
Yes, huh?
So that was carried down with the glaciers and deposited there up around the Great Lakes?
Well, they came down about almost to southern Indiana.
But that like you're saying, this particular rock was real special and important due to the aesthetic nature of the rock.
Right.
So Art, tell us about some of the different types of blades that they would have.
This right here is one of the classiest, look at the thinness of blades. And this is a Hopewellian, 2,000 years ago, Ross knife. And just a tremendous thing. And it was made this way. You keep thinking of ISIS now. but the slit throats, and that's why it's curved like that.
So the prevailing theory for this type of blade is that it was for some type of sacrificial ceremony.
Some sort of ceremony. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't have wanted to be the guest.
No. Or the person of honor.
Right. Say, we're really honoring you today.
Now, let me ask you this: with blades like this, down in pre-Columbian South America, at this same time, you have cultures practicing religiously the same type of,
right.
let's say, death cult style of sacrifice.
Right.
Do you think that those types of ideas were traded from as far south as Mexico up into Hopewell culture?
I think there was an intermix. There had to be. It's not that much distance, and it's the same that they have the theories nowadays about, how was America discovered? It's probably discovered by a lot of people.
Now, let me ask you this, Art. What do you think is the greatest danger to collectors and to people out in the field actually collecting? What is the greatest danger for the 21st century collector? Guys like me, guys like Chris, young people out there that are watching this. What do you think is the greatest danger to collecting today?
That it could be banned.
Wow.
Yeah, there's that possibility. There's not a lot of close-knit PR work between professional archaeologists, whatever type of archaeologist I am, avocational, whatever, and then the general layperson, there's a vast difference, and we have to somehow get this divide and teach, you don't want to say teach them, but teach the archaeologists that their best friend is the collector. Because there's more of us
than there are
of them.
Because there's always been, in the past, what I've always learned is that, archaeologists and the private amateur collector worked hand in hand. The University of Tennessee, for example, back in the 70s, had an amateur archaeological program in which amateur archaeologists could go out and excavate a site just like an archaeologist, didn't have to have a degree, and would turn in all the information to the archaeologist because the state at the time didn't have the money or the funds to finance and resource. And I think that's always been the greatest problem with archaeology is that the universities simply do not have the money. There's no money there.
Right.
But what always baffled me is that, okay, they don't have the money, but they have an immense amount of people out there who are willing to donate their own personal time, effort, and energy, and they are willing to record things archaeologically and are enthusiastic to record things archaeology. Yet in the archaeological community today, and it seems like it started in the 80s, but really the 80s and the 90s and today, people that collect or people that pick up arrowheads are looked upon as evil, as villainized, the worst people in the world. And why do you think that is? Do you think Indiana Jones killed collecting? With his statement, it should be in a museum.
Like Cheech and Chong's sort of hurt marijuana. There's been that perception, and then there are some, I guess, bad people. There's people out for, they're poor, and they're out for money, and they'll trespass. You have to be respectful of somebody else's position in life, of the ownership of their property, and if you can approach it in a very civil, nice way, maybe even offer a little money, say, give you a little money. I don't want to hurt anything. I just want to walk around these fields. And because in actuality, if you keep doing what you're doing, nobody picks the things up. The plows and everything will eventually destroy it.
Well, that and urbanization.
Right. And then we, pave. Think of the town of Louisville, Kentucky. Probably one of the greatest Indian relic sites, bar none, in America. But you can't see it. It's all paved over. And and that's what's happening.
Is it's all getting paved over and destroyed.
That's why red bannerstones are found on golf courses in Louisville. There was. Yeah.
Makes you want to go help them dig a sand trap.
Boy, you do.
But, you said something real interesting, about how there's a lot that archaeologists can learn from collectors.
Mm.
What are some of the things that professional archaeologists can learn from collectors like us?
Well, they, they can get a particular point type from, the amount of work that they can do in one little area. Collectors are all over the area. Now they could say, well, I found this particular point type in Portland, Indiana. I found it near Louisville, Kentucky. And we can now log all this, and we have a much greater database than if just one archaeologist is going out, well, I found this on site 107.
Right. Do you think that, or at least it's always been my opinion that, archaeologists are, because they weren't present and because a professional wasn't present, that everything that the collector picked up, because they're not trained enough or they haven't been around it enough, that they're not educated enough because they didn't go to school to know what the heck they're talking about, and therefore what they say is not trustworthy,
Right.
is not reasonable to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's always seemed like a very arrogant assumption on the part of the archaeological community, because like you've handled more antiquities than probably any archaeologist, living or dead, that has ever existed in North America. That's a bold statement, but I'd say it's probably a very correct one.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount and the diversity of artifacts that you have held, that you have seen, that you have studied yourself, gives you a knowledge that is far greater, than most universities and most teachers.
Exactly
and
what we're
professors in
talking about,
universities.
Chase. We have an example that we brought with us of a prehistoric collector.
Mm-hmm.
And this right here was a Crib Mound collector. There was a ball of clay. Once the ball of clay was cracked open, all these arrowheads were in there. And this means that some individual collected these, because they're not from the crib, they're from way away.
Yeah, all these point types, because of their material
Right.
and style, are from other locations around.
Right. This is from near Hopkinsville, Kentucky. It's a Churchill Kirk. Here's a Hopewell, which is already closed. Here's a Crib Mound arrow. Fossiliferous flint, which is a side notch, early archaic. But there's so much of diversity that we can see that they were thinking the same as we are,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm trying to instill archaeologists and collectors getting together.
Mm-hmm. And that's important because there's a lot of information in the minds of collectors that it seems that archaeologists never had.
Collective thought is what produces great things.
Right, bringing people together.
That's what the Agrarian society did. They could farm. They could sit around and talk. They could sit around and invent.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have to go every day from daylight to dark to kill a deer to feed the tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And so helps.
One of the things that I would like to do with my life is try to bring these two worlds together. Is try to bring the world of archaeology and bring the world of collectors together. Because it seems like there's so much that can be learned. And to me, the greatest crime out there is the single greatest thing is the fact of lack of funding. There is no funding, there is no money for any professional archaeological work to be done, even on important sites, period.
Right.
So
we always have money for something else.
Right, always got money to build a bridge, but archaeologists have at their fingertips an array of immensely intelligent and very enthusiastic people that are willing to, in their free time, to go out there and do a little work.
Right.
Do the legwork. All they'd like is just a little bit of credit, share a little bit of credit, with them for their help, for their time. And to me, that doesn't seem like a very difficult thing to ask.
Not at all.
I'm a very big believer in the fact that you do not have to have a college degree to be an intelligent person.
That's for sure.
So, and some of the greatest discoveries in archaeology, in archaeological history, was done by amateurs. Look at what was dug in the 30s and the 40s by professional archaeologists. Look at what they recorded. They didn't record anything in the teens, 1890s. The Smithsonian dug in the 1890s, dug more and recorded less than their private collectors that do more today than what they did just as far as just recording goes. But on archaeology's defense is that it is a progressive learning. They're getting better and better and better about recording things. But it would just be nice to see those two worlds come together. Because there's a lot of amateurs out there that would like to help. And I'm sure there are archaeologists out there that would be willing to have that help.
Just called ask.
All you got to do is ask.
Right.
Well, Art, you've had a lot of experiences collecting, searching, hunting. What's some of your most memorable stories? What's some of your most memorable finds, hunts, stories, camaraderie? What's some of the things that you've enjoyed most?
I had two mentors. I had Edward Buddy Scheidegger, and I had Gray Ladasser from St. Louis. They teach to me or was with me during my formative days of learning how to collect and what to collect and what not to collect and what to do. And Gray Ladasser told me, he said, Arthur, my one goal in life, Gray lives in St. Louis, my one goal in life is to go to the Crib Mound with you in your boat during what you consider a rough time. I said, a rough time? You mean a storm? Lots of wind? Yeah, that's what I mean. And I said, well, we're going to do it then. I'll tell you, I'll call you. So I was watching the weather reports, and the river's high, and wind's blowing, it's colder and crap. And I called Gray. I said, Gray, I think if you could come over tomorrow, we'll get my boat and we'll go down the old river and check things out. Okay, I'll be there. I'll be there first thing. So we got out on the water. I hadn't anticipated how rough it really was. It was rougher than I could imagine. At that time, I had a 16-foot John boat that its draft was only about this big when two people were in it. Water could come over the sides any time, bow in, do any kind of thing. Had a 35-horse Johnson. And I said, well, we're going. It's not going to be too pleasant. And it was so cold that when the water would hit my coat, it would freeze instantly, and I could take my hand and hit it. I mean, like up north in the wilderness. So anyway, we're going down, and we'd go into one of these troughs in the river, and hell, we couldn't see either bank, and the wind's a-howling, it's colder than blue belly hell, and Gray's looking at me, and he's nodding his head, and he said, well, this is an adventure. It sure is. And then he put his head down, and he said, and to think, I teach water safety in St. Louis. I'll never forget Gray telling me that. I teach water safety in St. Louis.
I tell you, one of my favorites is you guys were walking the bank on the Crib, and the Army Corps engineers showed up.
Oh yeah, I'll tell that story. So anyway, we were down at the Crib, and there's probably 6 or 7 people, and we were back in those days. It was all right to dig a little hole. We had permission from the landowner, and there wasn't any laws against it. And it was just we were just trying to find arrowheads, And so we're scouring away, and down the river comes this. I guess it had 4,500 horsepower Corps of Engineer barge. He's coming along and toots his horn. Of course, we all waved back, and then everybody was friendly. And he gets on his foghorn or his horn, and he said, what are you doing? And I hollered out, I said, we're digging for rocks. You need any help? I said, boy, we could use all the help we could get. And he said, I'll be right over. So the guy turned his vessel around, this great big huge Corps of Engineer vessel, backed it up to the crib, and he said, what I'm going to do is give it full power. He said, I've got 3,600 or 4,800 horsepower, twin props. And he said, what that'll do, that'll suck all the water away from the beach, and then when I let up, it'll come back. He said, that'll help you. So we had about a 20-foot boat that we'd all came in, heavy as hell. He got there, boy, he gave it the fire, and boy, he's laughing and he's carrying on. All the deckhands are cheering out there. I mean, we're having a time, and this water disappears. I mean, I'm looking, and there's 20 feet of sand out there that used to be water. And I thought, uh-oh, this is coming back. And he let off, and here come this water back. And there came that 20-foot boat up on top of the Indian Mound.
Oh, shit.
The rest of the day, all of us spent getting that boat back down to the damn water. We didn't get to hunt at all.
But that just blew me away, you know, because it's like back in the day, nobody really cared, you know, and everybody helped you out. You hear, God, good grief, Army Corps of Engineers today, man, they'd throw you under the jail now.
Well, it's like John Dillinger up there fleeing that jail talking to the warden, you know. He said, I had a nice day and you were pleasant enough, but I got to be going. And she said, well, you've been very nice.
What's some of the most dangerous things that you've been involved in?
Well, the most dangerous is when the river is really ripping and it's powerful. And the Crib Mound was built on a sandy knoll. So the sand is underneath the dirt. When the river hits just right, it cuts the sand out from underneath the dirt, and then the whole bank will slip. And if you happen to be standing on that piece of bank, you're going in the river. And you don't have any protective, you don't have life vests or anything, and you'd immediately drown. You have to grab for tree roots and everything else.
Have you ever been caught up in that kind of situation?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. And then one of the worst things that happened, I was up in Harrison County, and we were in a deep hole, and didn't know the bank was so slippery. And I had a pick in my hand, and the whole bank came down, and I didn't release the pick. I held on to it, and when the dirt hit the top of my hand, it took my hand and took it 90 degrees straight down. And so there were about 10 or 12 people there, and they had to put their backs against the bank to keep it from shearing off my neck. And they dug me out and then took me to Jewish Hospital in Louisville, and I was in the hospital 14 days.
Jeez.
In fact, the doctor told me, Dr. Goldman, he said, you know, this is the second worst hand injury I've ever seen. And I've been practicing for 35 years. I said, what happened to the first guy? And he said, he died. Guy got thrown out of a car. He said, I wish your hand would have been severed. He said, it'd been easier for me. But he said, it pulverized your ulna bone. And he said, it's going to be a horrible thing. He said, you'll never be a pianist.
Good grief. Wow.
Yeah. Sort of interesting.
What would you say was the funnest expedition you ever went on?
That's a hard thing to say, but
I know, you've been on so many.
I've been on a lot of fun things. The funnest to me was probably at GE Mound. Really, all that turned out badly for me. But I still hold to the fact that the GE guards were waving at me, not kicking me off. There was no trespassing signs. And so to me it was an attractive nuisance, so to speak. My job was to take the artifacts that we found and carry them up to the truck. We'd park the truck on the site. I was so exhausted I couldn't even walk, and I was in really good shape. That many artifacts.
Wow.
One of the celts weighed 18 pounds.
An 18-pound celt?
That long.
God.
Copper. Amazing. Amazing.
Now that site's now owned by Saudi
Arabians.
Saudi Arabia.
General Electric had to sell it because the price of oil got so high that in making Lexan, you need oil products. Who has oil but Saudi Arabians? So they bought it. They can run it.
And so now the General Electric Mound site, that's considered, and it is, in your opinion, considered one of the top.
I would call it the Walmart of the Hopewell.
The Walmart of the Hopewell.
At the confluence of the mighty Ohio and Wabash rivers.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly where the mound is. And it was on a 1968 geological survey map as a mound.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when the archaeologists went in to find the mound, they conveniently couldn't find it. And I'm now getting a map from the state of Indiana, which existed at that time, a topo map, where the GE mound is circled and it says Indian mound. Leave it alone.
Now, why was that?
Well, they knew it was a mound, and they were trying to avoid it, but General Electric wanted the mound down. They wanted it leveled because they wanted to put an incinerator at that place.
Right.
So they said that all the dirt from this mound goes inside the General Electric plant. The dirt, they made it a borrow pit for the road, though. So you have federal now in complicity with General Electric to take this mound and move it.
Wow.
But it ended up that Art Gerber moved it, and he got
in trouble.
I told Mr. Mackey, I said, you know, with Boyd Brothers working full out with the heaviest equipment they've got, one dry pan after another going down taking up dirt, took them 3 days. I said, isn't it amazing what I could accomplish?
Well, Art, I cannot thank you enough for having us out here, for sharing your knowledge, your passion, and your history, and most importantly, the friendship, man.
Our friendship.
That's all right, our friendship. I've
been
blessed to have known Art literally since I was born, and to be
that big. It was this big.
That's this big, and he didn't want to shoot me. And I've been blessed to have known Art, you know, for this many years.
And your mother was a professional photographer, great renown, and I was a professional photographer, and and your dad was into everything except he didn't like knives too well. But
no. But for me, this is really cool because, you know, now here I am in my early 30s, and I'm getting to interview you and have all these stories. I mean, to me, this is just awesome, man.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just so cool.
Well, it's like me and Gray Ladasser.
Yeah.
I just got to know him a little bit too late in life.
Yeah. Well, this is just, it's cool for me. We've got a lot more episodes that we're doing with Art. We're going to do an entire episode on the Crib Mound. We're going to do an entire episode on his term of endearment and prison life. And there's some great stories there. And we're going to do a really cool episode on just the history of this area. It'll be a driving chasing history episode, but it'll be neat. So we've got a lot more things that we're going to do with Art coming up here in the near future. So stay tuned.
We could even go by and say that is the oldest grade school in America, still in use.
Still in use. There's a lot of really neat things around these riverboat towns.
The Underground Railroad
guide
started right here.
Yeah.
Down to the Ohio River.
But Art is also, among other things, an author. And Art has written several books, and this is, without a doubt, a must for any collector, for any collection. It's Art Gerber's story. Tell us about your book, Art.
Well, the book is over 400 pages, and we designed it to last hundreds of years. Of all the copies that are out now, I haven't had one the binding ever to come off. So it's a tremendous thing. It's made with 100-pound enamel paper. Therefore, we could stack the ink on it. To stack ink, this book has 1 pound of ink in it. The most ink Taylor Publishing in Dallas, Texas, ever put into a book.
Wow.
And the reason I used my collection in making the book was that I knew the objects were real. And I wanted people to be able to look at a bannerstone, a dovetail, a deep notch, and say, "Oh, that's the way they're supposed to look. How come mine looks like this?" You know. And then I wanted it to show the cache, which is the greatest cache ever found in America, over 10,000 blades. And then the back of the book has one of my favorite bannerstones on it, on the section of beach where it was found. But the book is available right now. We've been in print a while, so we reduced the price. It's $100, and you can contact me by going to Art Gerber, P.O. Box 7, Tell City, Indiana 47586. And or if you have my phone number, call me or through Facebook.
Or through our Chasing History page on Facebook, Smoky Mountain Relic Room on Facebook.
That's true.
We can get you in touch with Art.
Right.
And Art even wrote a second book.
Right. This one I dictated to Jim Fisher. Jim Fisher is a former FBI agent under Hoover. He was a private investigator, and he teaches criminology at the University of Pennsylvania. I wanted a book that was so accurate that pertained to my trial, my incarceration, that they could go in the bibliography and say, "Oh yeah, that court document." In other words, everything we say has been annotated through like 15 pages of bibliography in the back. So very accurate. Could be a teaching book.
Cool. And there again, this book, P.O. Box 7, Tell City, Indiana.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What's the zip code?
47586.
47586. Or just find us on find Art on Facebook, or find us on Facebook, Chasing History, and we'll get you through these books. You got to have them for your collection, definitely, for sure. And of course, one of Art's famous Crib Mound blades.
Yeah, these blades are something. I'm just so low on them that I had 10,000, but now I have my top 200, and I just got a fall fraction of my top 200. So, but they are, I write on them my name, and it's just a piece of history. Not that expensive.
Well, Art, if there was one thing that you could say to younger collectors out there, my age, Chris's age, and even younger, if there was some sort of advice that you could give them, what would that advice be?
My advice to a young person right now would probably be ask permission instead of forgiveness. I used to go the opposite way. But no, I think that you got to be respectful of other people's property, other people's rights, other people's beliefs. And I think if you do that and you approach somebody in a nice way, I think everybody can get along and will save the few remaining artifacts there are from destruction.
That sounds like sound advice to me.
Right.
Well, Art, I cannot thank you enough again for sitting down and doing this interview with us. Remember, guys, how do you make the world a better place? Just one person at a time. Be good to yourselves, be good to others, and just be good people. And always remember, how do you know where you're going unless you know where you've been? It's in studying and understanding the mistakes of the past that prevent the failures of the future. Follow us on Facebook at Chasing History. Come to the shop, Smoky Mountain Relic Room. We will never, ever, ever be on Twitter. I like Twitter. That's why. So keep up with us. We got a lot more Chasing History to come. This ain't going to end. Art, thanks, man.
Thank you, sir.
Woohoo!
Wells Fargo office. Couldn't hardly see up over the counter. And the guy looked down and he said, "What do you want, son?" "I want to be a stagecoach driver." "Well, how old are you?" 12. "That's a little young. Can you shoot a shotgun?" I've been shooting one of those since I was 8. He said, well, let's have you ride shotgun for a while till you get the hang of the driving. Okay. So the next morning they're out galloping along in the stagecoach, and the boy has his shotgun. The driver said, son, look back and see if there's any hostiles back there. The boy turned around and looked, and he said, oh, way back there there's this dust. Okay. And the person in the dust, how big is he? Well, he's that big. And he said, well, how far back is that, son? He said, well, sir, I've only been on the job 6 hours. I'm not for sure. And he said, well, if he's that big, he's 2 days back. We got to be careful. So the next day they're galloping. Son, look for that hostile. Little boy looks around. He said, oh, he's a lot bigger. He said, well, how big is he today? And he said, he's this big. 1 day back, son, we got to be careful. You'll be honest. So the next morning they're galloping along. The driver said, son, check for that hostile. Little boy wheels around with his shotgun. He said, my God, he's right here in back of the stagecoach. He's ready to climb on. And the driver said, well, you've got to shoot him. That's your job. And the little boy started crying. He says, now what's wrong? He said, I can't shoot him. He said, why can't you shoot him? Well, I've known him since he was that big.